When you think about PSN, you think about one thing. That is truly unique, beautiful games like Journey, Flow. I can go on and on and on. But today, we're going to show you Unfinished Swan. I'm joined with Ian Dallas, Creative Director. Matt, it's good to have you here. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great.
So this is your first E3?
Yes.
Crazy?
First E3 presenting.
Presenting, right on.
Yeah.
You're so chill and calm, just
Thank
like your
you.
game.
Yeah, it's a pretty chill game.
So let's actually cut right to gameplay, because I just want to jump into it.
Yeah,
so
please.
That's the cue for the control room.
Yeah.
Gameplay on screen, please. So talk about the PlayStation logo.
It's impressive. It's massive.
It's a massive PlayStation logo.
Yeah.
So before we cut to the gameplay, talk about, actually here we go, gameplay.
Yeah, so...
Before we start, talk about the fact, why is this just a white plain canvas? Just walk us through this.
Yeah, so it began as a graduate student prototype, and it was just a white room with black paint. And it took about a year of messing around with that to try and figure out what the game was going to be. It's a pretty abstract concept that could have gone a lot of different directions, but we're pretty excited about the way that it did go.
Cool, so let's see what actually happens.
So yeah, this is the way that the game starts, and this is actually like literally the way that the game starts. We've been demoing it for the last hour or two, and I think every player starts with exactly this screen, and it takes players a while, usually like 30 seconds or so, to figure out that the game is actually...
30 seconds in gamer terms is a while, yes.
Yeah, it's actually moving. And so what they first start doing is they start, mashing buttons, basically. And
so mash away.
Yeah, so once they mash a few buttons, then eventually start mashing the triggers, and then they start throwing paintballs. And it's pretty emblematic of the way that the whole game works. So we try not to tell players anything at all. This is a game about exploration, and we really want players to feel like they're exploring the game as well as like the environment that they're in. And we start out with this very abstract kind of space, which is almost exactly what the game was 4 years ago. It's just a box. And that's
so
plenty.
I've got this box. It's going to be white kid. All right, cool.
Yeah,
So that was the pitch.
It's really just four walls and a floor and a ceiling. And then eventually players, hopefully make their way out into the wider world around them. And we start to layer in things like, this bench here, and eventually you'll start seeing trees. And we want to go for this very minimalist feel that eventually starts to ramp up.
Right on. So, talk about the process of like starting off with that empty box. It's taken quite a while. Like when you're a gamer, you don't understand really that something like this takes quite a while, several years. Talk about how many years it took to get to where we are today.
Yeah, so it was 1 year of prototyping just on my own when I was a graduate student.
A lot of empty boxes.
And then, figured out, okay, this is what the game is. Like, sort of narrowed in on what the feeling was, which was evoking a sense of awe and wonder. And that's not a very specific thing, but it was enough to kind of, start to figure out what the rest of the game was. And then another 3 years of making this game. Yes. And it's a very lovely frog that eventually gets eaten by a sea monster. And
the sense of wonder and amazement. That was it right there.
Yeah, it's a little kernel of that, hopefully. And trying to convey that this is not necessarily a safe world. One of the things that we found was that with this pure black and white aesthetic early on, people brought this kind of sense of unease with it already. And so that's something that we tried to leverage. And we found that in the reference material that we looked at, things that did a really good job of evoking the sense of curiosity and a bit of awe and wonder, like Alice in Wonderland and other storybooks, did a fantastic job of that. And one of the things that really worked was this sense of a world that is not necessarily safe for children, even though it's ostensibly, kind of this storybook vibe.
Safe. Yeah,
there are these elements that, are out there, maybe not necessarily to get you,
now,
but wouldn't mind eating you.
These are swan feet.
These are swan feet.
Aha! Here's where the
game,
unfinished swan part of the game comes into play.
It is not a completely random title. In the game, the player is a young boy who is chasing after a swan. And the swan has wandered off into this sort of surreal landscape that begins completely white, and then eventually, we go off in some different directions.
So are you playing from the perspective of this boy?
Yes.
Okay.
You are, roughly so high, and we find that there are times where we'll make a table and put it in game, and it's like, somebody screwed up this table. It's way too big. And then we have to remind ourselves, like, oh, we're not like a 9-foot-tall space marine in this game. We're a child, and have to. I'm
gonna take that as a burn. I heard a burn there. That was a burn.
We love our 9-foot-tall space marine.
Okay, so besides the swan feet, there's actually other items that are in gold. Why are those specific items in gold?
That was something that we found added a little bit of variety to the game.
Okay.
So in the very beginning, when we started developing, it was completely white. And we found that after about 5 minutes, people started to tune out. and that in giving them like slightly longer term goals, like, oh, I can see these yellow things off in the distance, or I can see this brightly colored balloon that's bobbing in the distance, that gave players something to sort of orient themselves with. And weirdly, we were trying to create a game that didn't put a lot of restrictions on players, but we found that by opening it up too much, that actually made people feel uncomfortable. So in giving players more of a concrete goal, it actually encouraged them to go off the path. So once we showed them what the path was, then they felt like they could deviate and wander around and really explore the game in the way that we were hoping they would.
And what's really cool is, the first time I saw this demo a couple months ago, I think you hit the nail right in the head when you said every single experience is radically different, because there's no way you can tell or predict where these splashes are going to go with each individual player. So essentially, they're creating their own world in their own very unique way.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting things about this game developing it is that sometimes watching playtests, we'll look at each other and be like, where the heck is this person? We have absolutely no idea. Often it's because they got somewhere they weren't supposed to, but it's like, even we, having lived with these worlds for 3 years now, are still surprised by them, with the black and white.
Now, be honest, somewhere at Sony Santa Monica, there is a computer that actually has this all rendered out, and you can actually see where you're walking, correct?
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, the artists
you're just
and
not like
else.
blindly just creating things. Okay, good.
Yeah, that was one of the
just
first
taking care of you, man. Taking care of you.
And every so often in development, that would break, and there'd be a lot of grumbling of like, oh, now we have to play like players. Because, when you're trying to get in and tweak models and things, it can be pretty difficult when it's all white.
Now, what's really cool is people watching this demo, they're like, oh, he's just splashing black everywhere. But sometimes you actually have to splash behind an object to build out a silhouette. That's kind of tricky. How'd you figure that out? Like, how'd you sit there and change that perspective in your brain?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the great stuff in the game just evolved out of playing around.
Okay.
So there are things that are very hard to visualize, that when you get in there and you can actually, we basically build toys for ourselves and make these little worlds and then just flat around and figure out like what would be interesting to do in that space. And so our process has really been to just play it like almost as if we were players, which is helped by the fact that it's this, kind of abstract white space.
Sean,
you can make a world, and then I have no idea how to play it, if I've never seen it before, even if I've played, a game that was very similar for 3 years.
Well, let's actually cue you up, because I know there's something new you want to show us today, right? So besides the splashing of color, I know you got a couple of seconds to load it up. Is there anything you want to talk about? PlayStation Move support, it's a kind of a big deal.
Yeah, so the game
between the DS3 and the PS Move.
Sure, we support either the DualShock or the PlayStation Move, and it's totally up to players. And it's one of the things that we integrated early on, and it was interesting that there are things that we didn't necessarily design for the Move, but we found actually played differently, not necessarily better or worse. But the Move gives you a point on screen that you're aiming at, as opposed to having to move the whole camera around like you would with the DualShock. So yeah, it's neither better nor worse, but like interestingly different. That the Move gives you more control, in some areas. Than,
now with the PS Move, okay, so what are we seeing here? This is brand new. Actually, not to me. I saw this months ago, and I was like, "What is this? It's gorgeous." But now we actually have more of a traditional level.
Yeah. So we found that with the black and white painting, that it was something that was really intense for players.
Right.
And intense in a good way. We're hoping that we create a really memorable experience for people, but there's a threshold for players that after, about 15 minutes or so of a really intense experience, you want something that's a little bit more low-key. And so this was, kind of trying to vary that up and to lower the tension a little bit. One of the things that, we often hear people talk about their experience in the black and white painting section is that it feels like being blind. So they feel like they're moving around, just like feeling their way.
Right.
And so in this game, in this chapter of the game, we introduced a totally new mechanic that requires the player to have a better kind of situational awareness to be able to see things that are more than 5 feet away.
That's
and
creepy.
to, kind of plan their moves out a little bit more. So yeah, it's variety as much as anything.
So what was that creepy thing? That was
those
very
are
creepy.
eyes that are out there in the darkness. And at this point, they can't necessarily kill you, spoiler.
But what does it mean?
Eventually.
So there is actually enemies in this game.
They're not enemies in the sense that there's no combat in the game per se, but there are definitely things that wouldn't mind eating you and have no trouble doing so.
That small child looks delicious. I'd like to eat him. So now we're actually seeing some green. We're going to see some growth mechanics here. Talk about that.
So Ben, our level designer who's playing the game, will, I assume, be able to get here and
come on, Ben.
Start using this. So you're getting a little bit of a flash forward. Usually it takes people a couple of minutes, which is one of the things that we really wanted players to discover on their own. And it's always a little bit frustrating. It's like being a parent, seeing a child stumble with things that your first impulse is like to make it really easy for people.
So are you focus testing this? Like, how are you getting feedback? How
Constantly. I think that's the
good.
only way to know for something like this if you're really succeeding, because we want it to be, I mean, not necessarily challenging, but we want players to have to actively explore the world. We don't want to have, you know, giant green arrows, no offense to the Crazy Taxi fans out there, that show them everything they have to do. We want people to feel like, you know, they're really discovering these things for themselves. And, you know, these vines that the players are growing are, you know, this mechanic that they're going to use throughout this chapter that is, you know, like a multifaceted tool that we'll see here that, you know, you can use to climb up this wall. And one of the most satisfying experiences is when people grow the vines and then first, you know, it's like a scientific method. Yeah, they're like, I wonder if I could, and then, you know, when they first try, that it's really
that's
satisfying.
great game design. See, that's awesome. Congrats on that.
When it works.
That's awesome. So I gotta ask, when did you realize you weren't crazy? Like, this idea is actually gonna work?
I mean, I think we're still crazy. I think we just have
amazing answer.
a lot of really terrible ideas that, you know, one of the good fortunes of being a player is that you don't have to see all the really terrible ideas. Right. So the life of a focus tester or a play tester who comes in is, you know, for better or worse, to see all of the really bad stuff and all the really confusing things. And, you know, these vines, it's really interesting how different, like originally, these vines were controlled by shooting the ball at the tip of the vine, which was kind of interesting on paper, but ended up being really frustrating and didn't give us, like, what we wanted players to feel in this game was a sense of freedom. So they could just, like a child, you know, throw paint everywhere or throw these water balls wherever they wanted. And so it required a bizarre amount of tuning. And at this point, I'm a little embarrassed to say, I don't even understand how these work anymore.
I was just gonna say, how do these vines work?
They, I really honestly don't know. We went through a bunch of different versions of it. And then ultimately we found something that was just a little bit surprising and easy enough to control, but would do these random things that, like, even as the creator, I don't totally understand, which really makes them feel a lot more alive, even for me.
So explain that. How don't you understand? Is this something you envisioned and then the engineers at Sony Santa Monica said, here, we made it work? You're just like, wow, okay. Is that how it works?
So I ended up doing a lot of programming early on, and one of my jobs on the project is to write really terrible code and get things just like base functionality working. And then eventually much smarter programmers come in and make it fast enough.
Like, move.
Yeah. But no, originally it was just this like little sandbox of a world that was really frustrating to control. And then eventually, like really like 6 months or so of work, it's a bizarre amount of time that it takes. And we're so fortunate to have Sony behind us, because if it was just, you know, the two of us or something in a basement, we would never have had the time to explore all these genuinely terrible ideas and cast them off and find the things that were these like sparkling gems and polish them and make them work. And, you know, because we have Sony behind us, they're willing to give us 3 years, and, you know, at this point the team is up to, I think, 12 people, to realize this kind of crazy dream.
Okay, so, you know, one last question. I hate to do this to you. You know, you've been working with Sony for quite a while, and I'm sure when they handed you the move, you're like, ooh, cool, you can do this. But when they handed you a PS Vita, come on, man. PS Vita, this would be a brilliant game on PS Vita. Are you experimenting? Should we be expecting something?
No comment at this point, sadly.
Oh.
Even for the PlayStation blog.
I know, I hear you, brother.
You can't tell us everything.
You said a lot with that one answer. Dude, amazing. You should be very proud of this game. Enjoy your E3.